Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Tonight, a captivating exploration of an emotion that resides within each and every one of us. Anger, a weapon that holds the power to both annihilate and safeguard, a potent energy that courses through our veins, igniting a fierce inferno, capable of engulfing us entirely. It possesses the ability to transform even the most logical minds into vessels of fury, driving them towards actions that defy rationale. The capacity to dismantle bridges that once connected hearts, leaving behind mere remnants of shattered relationships. But is anger always the malefactor? Or does it serve a purpose, a force that compels us to rise against injustice and fight for our convictions? The catalyst for change, something fueling our resilience and propelling us forward when all hope seems lost. We scrutinize the intricate and multifaceted relationship that we all share with anger, the precarious tightrope we traverse between control and pandemonium. So, let's get started, shall we? When I was made aware my boyfriend was cheating on me, I broke it off immediately, right then and there. My friend texted me pictures and messages saying he was seen at an IHOP with another girl. I had suspicions he was creeping around, but it hurt all the same. The night I found out, we had plans for him to come over after work. Work was his code word for IHOP with some bitch. I would have never guessed that's what it meant, even though I did find a weird set of scratches on his back one morning after he got out of the shower. He had a believable excuse for that too. Love will make you believe anything near plausible, and Cole could wind up a charming story with the snap of a finger. Thankfully, with this cold, hard evidence, I could finally accept the truth and move on. But it was a pretty horrible way to close a chapter in my life. The same night I received the picture, Cole's at my door, pounding like crazy, begging to be let in, refusing to leave until I talked to him. My friend/upstairs neighbor Zelly was over, consoling me when he showed up. She started yelling at him through the door, telling him to leave, but he stood outside knocking. Then he'd leave and call my cell phone 1,000 times, hanging up and calling again before the answering machine could pick up. My phone was constantly buzzing until he started pounding on the door again. His behavior escalated the longer he knocked. Soon he started shaking the door handle and putting his shoulder into the door frame until finally one of my neighbors opened their door. When this happened, he turned and walked out to the parking lot and entered his car. Zelly and I could barely see his car if we look out the back patio out to the street. A neighbor had apparently called the cops because we heard a few police officers walking around. Their flashlights move below our patio, and there's no sign that they've found anything. But they don't search the back parking lot where we saw him run. I had just experienced a loved betrayal, but I didn't want him to have a police record over this. He might have even been drunk, who knows, but if he would have met those cops that night, there would have been trouble. The cops leave and hours pass. Zelly and I attempt to take turns staying awake just to keep an eye out and check on the car. During one of my power naps, Zelly shakes me awake. Cole's dome light had just turned on. Still groggy, I crawled out to look through the slats of the patio fence. The cold wind outside fully wakes me up again. It's easy to spot his car because it's the only illuminated cube in the dark parking lot. We'd also been keeping tabs on it all night before the sunset. All of this started happening around 5 or 6, maybe in the afternoon, but now it was the middle of the night. The light started getting partially blocked out, and it looks like the whole car had begun to shake like a little earthquake had hit it. Zelly had crawled up next and got to see it just before the shaking slowed to a stop again. The dome light turned off soon after the car was still. Was he coming back? There was no way to tell. The parking lot was concealed in darkness again. However, it wasn't long before we could see another light beginning to glow in the far parking lot. At first, we didn't know what we were looking at. Unlike how we saw the dome light, it wasn't instantly illuminated. What we were staring at began as a low, moving glow that quickly grew in brightness. Zelly and I realized that the light was coming from rising flames engulfing the interior of the car. Then, the car door opens and we hear screams fill the parking lot. A figure has jumped out of the flaming vehicle. He too is on fire. Zelly calls 911 while I continue to watch the burning man. He's flailing, rolling on the ground, all the while continuing to scream. The car is now completely on fire. Black smoke fills the parking lot. The smell of burning gasoline and rubber. It's enough to make us shut our own back sliding door. The smoke hung in the air long after the fire department put out the flaming car. The vehicle's occupant speaks to the police and firemen on scene before leaving the charred mess in an ambulance. It was Cole. Later that afternoon, from my back patio, I could see the local news out doing a story about what had happened. The car had not been towed yet, and seeing it up close on the news was almost unreal. The report said a man had been sleeping in his car. He'd been attacked by a female assailant. The attacker entered his car around 1 a.m. He was stabbed multiple times, and his car was set ablaze after the attack. They didn't say his name on the news, but I knew it was Cole. His other girlfriend had followed him to my apartment. She came back later that night to commit the arson. When she found him sleeping in the car, her impulsive rage got the best of her. She stabbed him 3 times, none of which were fatal. It's been a decade since this incident happened, and I never saw Cole in person again. When he first got out of the hospital, he left a bunch of messages on my phone explaining what had happened in the parking lot that night. I answered none of them. Having a murderous ex-girlfriend, it'll always be a turn-off for me. So, I guess I'll just conclude my story like this. Cole, let's not meet again. It's impossible not to associate your name with the burning rubber smell that saturated my apartment for weeks. What did you do to piss that girl off so much? I know cheating is bad, but she wasn't even trying to talk about it. She went straight to burning your ass, and that kind of rage comes from deep within. I don't know. There's always 2 sides to a story. I guess after all these years, I'm still curious. I got to see her mugshot. She was pretty, but somehow you got her all messed up in the head, ruining both of y'all's lives. What did you do, Cole? I live in Miami, Florida. When I was in 5th grade, my best friend's family, though absurdly wealthy, loved picking mangoes from other people's houses. For one, they just flat out liked mangoes, and 2, it gave their 3 boys somewhere to alleviate their need to break the rules every once in a while. Sometime during the school year, my best friend and his family introduced this fun little crime to me and decided to take me on a few of their mango heists. I'll admit it was really fun. The parents would wait in the car, and the 4 of us boys, all aged 7 to 12, would hop someone's fence and pick up all the fallen mangoes, then head back to the car with a stash of 10 or so. Now there's a place called Homestead, around an hour from where we lived. I forgot the reason, but one day, my best friend's mom told us that Homestead was going to be the site of the next heist, and to be ready because there we could find the good mangoes. We head out, my best friend and I, 10, and his older brother, 12, with the mom driving. After what felt like forever, my friend's mom pulls up alongside this property with 4 vertical rows of trees stretching from the front gate down to the front of this house. So the mom parks up, we 3 boys hop out and jump the front fence. It was almost like a miniature forest within the property, with at least 40 to 50 mango trees, all lined up in rows in front of the house. My friend and his brother were working the right side, moving their way towards the house, picking up and plucking mangoes from this person's yard. I, on the other hand, worked the left side. But I decided to start at the trees near the front of the house and then work my way back. Mind you, one of the reasons my friend's mom chose this property was because there were no signs of life anywhere. I should also note our attire. We 3 boys were wearing all black, with masks made out of old t-shirts wrapped around the lower halves of our faces. We thought at 10 or 12 that we looked really cool, and the outfit really matched the whole mango robbing energy. As I'm picking up the mangoes next to the house, farthest from the fence, I see some of the blinds from the house in the back move. I was a fast kid, so the thought of the owner coming out and chasing really didn't bother me, so I just continued grabbing mangoes. All of a sudden, the front door of this old rinky-dinky shack busts open, and guess who's standing in the doorway? Yep, the owner, who was a short, heavy-set older man who looked like you could smell the cigarettes that he'd been smoking from a mile away. Well, dude takes one look out on the property and first sees my 2 friends near the middle of the trees on the right, then pans his head directly to me, standing maybe 30 yards from where he stood. All of us were dressed in our bad intentions apparel. I froze, not sure if I was about to be scolded. But this guy wasn't in the mood to talk. Instead, as he stood in the doorway, he reached somewhere behind the door and came back with what looked to be a double-barrel shotgun. Time started moving really slow as I pieced together in my tiny brain what was about to happen. The man raised his rifle, pointed it directly at me, leaned in to take aim, and fired. And let me tell you something, especially all of the young guys out there, the ones that think they're invincible, that no one can beat them up or hurt them, etc. When a bullet flies right past you, in this case, impacted a tree behind me, maybe a foot over my head, all that bullshit about wanting to be some superhero or saving the world by facing unimaginable forces of evil, it goes right out the fucking window. It was at that moment I realized I was about to sacrifice my life for a couple of mangoes. Quite frankly, I'm still surprised I didn't literally shit my pants. Well, after that first shot hit, the gears in my head started to turn, and I could only think of 2 things. 1, I had to drop the mangoes. 2, I had to make a fucking run for it. I immediately dumped the mangoes and hightailed it back towards the property. Thankfully, my friend and his brother saw the man pull out his gun and got a head start back to the car. This one little event in my life just might have been my greatest display of athleticism so far, in that I couldn't even feel my feet touching the ground as I ran, since I was moving that fast, and on top of that, the front fence that we initially climbed over was maybe around 6 feet tall. Getting into the property was a bit of a pain, but getting out, I can tell you my body didn't even touch that fence. I flew over that shit, and I jumped through the window of my friend's mom's car that she'd already started to roll down. I made it in, and we got out of there. As soon as I was in the back seat, she took off down the road, and back to Miami we went. She was going absolutely crazy, telling each of us that we should have been faster, more careful, yada, yada, yada. As scary as it was, and I mean, I was pretty much shaking the whole ride back. It was pretty exhilarating. I could finally say that I had survived a near-death experience. Unfortunately, though, before I was dropped off, my friend's mom made us all promise that we would never speak about it with anyone again. It had to stay between us. What happens in Homestead stays in Homestead, she said. So much for that. I witnessed the aftermath of my family business being torn into pieces by a fire. It was January 2018 when the fire occurred. At 10 a.m., my mother called me. I'd only been at work for an hour. "Hurry, everything's gone. There was a fire. You need to come right now." I was in shock. I kept asking her for more information. How could this have happened? How big was the fire? When she says everything, does she really mean everything? I thought maybe she could be exaggerating. We've had the business for 20 plus years and have never experienced something of this magnitude. I ran for the bus. I had so many questions running through my head. My heart was racing, pounding. My body was sweating and tears ran down my cheeks as I placed my head on the window. As soon as I arrived, my jaw dropped. I inhaled the smoke and choked profusely. The walls were black, and the glass shattered. I walked into the kitchen. Nothing felt real. It felt like a dream, a nightmare. I've never seen my dad so heartbroken. We were closed for 6 long months. It really was a difficult time, financially and emotionally. But we got through it, and I think we're all a lot more appreciative than we were before. The date is 1970-something. I'm about 12 years old, sitting in the pitch dark on the side of a mountain. It's about 30 minutes till sunrise, and I'm deer hunting before school. I've hiked in by flashlight to be at my stand as the deer return from the fields at daybreak. It's dead still. No wind. Nothing except that ringing people's ears make when there's nothing to drown it out. Now that my light is off, I can't see my hand in front of my face. Time passes and things start to stir. I start hearing things moving in the leaves. I play a game in my head to keep busy as I wait. I listen to the pattern that the animals make, and I try to identify which animal is making it. I hear this shh, shh, shh noise, and in my head pops this image of a squirrel bouncing across the ground. Next, I hear the steady cadence of a rabbit hopping in the leaves. I still can't see a thing. This makes the images I imagine all the more vivid. I can make out the random noise of birds in the limbs stirring for the coming day. And then, just at the edge of perception, I hear a shuffling sound in the leaves. It slowly gets louder. I know that noise. It is another person making their way in the pitch dark through the woods towards me. They have no idea I'm there. I could stay quiet and flip on my light at the last moment when they're right on top of me. That might be fun. I would scare them, but is this wise or cruel? So I'm debating this as the shuffle of the leaves gets louder and louder. They must be just a few feet away from me. I'm thinking how stupid they are to have come into the woods without a flashlight, and then I hear it. This guy is grunting like a pig, and the leaf noise is from him rooting around with his snout. I can see him clearly in my head, right in front of me in the pitch dark. It's a damn pig? Wait, bears grunt like that. And yes, at this distance I can hear the claws scraping a rock as he forages, and he's still coming, just a few feet in front of me now. Do I flip on my light? Do I yell and try to scare him? Do I give him a little whistle? But I do nothing, frozen in fear from the image of me flipping on my light to see this angry big bear head right in front of my face. It takes what felt like forever before I was sure the sounds were now to the left and receding, and I could see first light. I was going to live. As the morning broke, I could see clearly the path that the bear had made in the leaves. There was a path straight towards me. Then, maybe 3 feet from me, he'd stopped, sniffed me out, and made an obvious detour around my stand. 10 feet behind me, he was already back on his previous path. Yes, that morning, so many years ago, I came close to pissing my pants. I could feel my heart pounding and hear the blood racing through my veins. I was alive. It felt great. I believe children are a little more connected to the other side when they arrive here, until the third-dimensional world we live in beats the magical thinking out of us. Why do I believe this? Well, before I had my first confirmed psychic experience at the age of 3.5, I had already had a very strange paranormal experience a few months prior to that. One that I cannot explain to this day. This was my very first introduction into the realm of the unexplained that I can recall. In the early 1960s, my mother was a bit of an anomaly. She worked in a large corporation while most other mothers stayed at home. My father worked as well. My oldest sister was in school. This forced my parents to search for childcare. My mother found a woman about 6 blocks from our house and began dropping me off there every morning. Now, I was a very loved child up until then, and I'd always felt secure and safe. But this, my first foray into the world outside my family, was a bit of a shocker. The babysitter had 2 little girls that were 2 to 4 years older than me, and they obviously really disliked my being there. They didn't get a lot of attention from their disengaged mother and resented what little attention she had been paid to give me. Within the first few weeks of being there, they would hide every one of my toys that I brought to play with and torture me endlessly. It was a hide-and-seek game with my toy of the day that I had brought. I could never win because they always hid it in one closet that we're not allowed to go into. That was in their mother's bedroom. I was a compliant child who obeyed the rules, never looked for the mother's bedroom. I didn't understand the concept of deviousness, lies, and manipulation at the time, and then I would get distracted and finally forget about them. But I eventually caught on, stopped giving them my toys to hide. With that game over, they resorted to simply calling me to come find them down the hallway, pulling me away from quietly watching cartoons in the living room. As I toddled down the hall, one of them jumped out of hiding and bit me as hard as she could on the arm, for no reason other than pure hatred. I was stunned at this behavior and this unprovoked attack. When I cried in pain and complained to the woman who was tending to tasks in the kitchen, I was telling her that her children were behaving like animals, hurting me. Her detached response was simply, "Well, bite them back." I was stunned that the rules that applied in my house didn't apparently apply in others, and that random violence was condoned and even encouraged here. I tried to point out that her girls were much bigger and stronger than I was, and she just shrugged. If I had bitten someone, my mother would have beaten my butt. Why did this woman not react the same way? For the first time in my life, I felt vulnerable, afraid, and uncertain. I was getting my first taste of injustice in this dimension. Our usual daily routine was to hang out in the house in the morning watching cartoons, where I was left to fend off their pinching attacks and emotional treachery. Then we'd have lunch around noon, and then the mother would shoo us out into the backyard for a while, presumably to get some peace and quiet. We'd stay outside for about an hour, but shortly thereafter, in the Texas summer, it would get very hot. There was no swing set or real toys to play with, so after a while, one child would report she needed to go to the bathroom and leave the group. A few minutes later, the second would state that she was going to get a drink or something and would leave me, waiting, alone, in the yard. Of course, neither of them came back, and I was baking out there in the hot summer sun by myself. I would go to the back screen door that led into the kitchen and the living room area to see where everyone was. There was the mother, 6 feet away from me, reading a newspaper in the kitchen, and the girls were in the cool shade of the house, watching afternoon cartoons. Those were the days before air conditioning. Well, I certainly didn't want to be outside in the heat with nothing to do, and I really would like to be in a cool house watching cartoons too, so I tried to open the door. First came the surprise, and then the shocking realization that there was a conspiracy against me when I found the door to be locked. I asked the mother to unlock the door please and let me in, but she just said, "Nope, you stay outside." My pleas that it was hot, or that I was tired or thirsty, or I'm 3 years old, shouldn't I be taking a nap? All of it fell on deaf ears as the mother just shut me down with every request. The girls rolled over and looked at me from their spot on the floor in front of the TV and snickered in glee at my plight. Apparently, this is how the mother decided to show her girls that she loved them. Group torture of a little outsider girl. I don't know. A couple of hours later, the father would show up from work. I would sneak into the house right behind him as the mother unlocked the door for him. He never questioned why the door was locked in the first place or why I'd been outside. After the third or fourth day of this, I tried waiting for the dad to come up the walkway. So I proceeded to go out to the front yard and sit by the curb in the shade of a tree and wait for him there. My plan was to tell him about the unfair treatment I was getting when he would presumably ask what I was doing upon his arrival. I had a plan for justice. But the mother suddenly realized I wasn't on the back porch anymore and was looking for me. When she found me by the curb, she freaked out and beat me with a paddle so hard she left a large, noticeable bruise on my body. A couple. I was to never go out into the front yard again, she screamed. I did, however, get to stay in that particular afternoon, watch cartoons in the shade for a little bit, till my parents came to pick me up. Apparently, she realized her mistake, because when the father came home before my parents arrived, she showed him the bruises that she'd left on my body with some concern. She wondered out loud to him what my mother might think about this. I'm not sure, but his reply seemed to be along the lines of, "You did it, you're going to have to deal with it." That night, when giving me a bath, my mother notices them too and questioned me about them. I explained, as best as a 3-year-old can, why I'd gotten a spanking. My mother seemed to get it and seemed upset with her. I had a feeling that my mother was going to right this wrong. She was a strong woman. I had no doubt she would protect me. The next morning, though, I was dropped off as usual, and my mother didn't say anything. She actually had what appeared to be a friendly conversation with that woman. In retrospect, I'm sure that she was just being smart and simply didn't want to rile the woman into abusing me even more on my last day, as she needed to find alternate childcare. So she kept her mouth shut and pretended everything was fine and left me there to go to work. Things were harder for working women back then. Now, here's where it gets interesting. I felt a little more than betrayed and dismayed after watching my mother converse in a friendly manner to this woman, and I thought that there was nothing to be done about my situation. Was this woman somehow stronger than my mother? I resigned myself to, that's the way it is, I guess. This is my lot and I'll have to make the best of it. But I'd hoped that the woman would be a little kinder after realizing that her abuse had left me with bruises. Well, it didn't, and she wasn't. The same routine happened that afternoon, except this time, when the girls made their excuses to go into the house, I attached myself to them, tried to go in at that very same time, thinking there might be a time window thing, and maybe it wasn't all about just being mean to me. They forcibly shoved me away from them and prevented me from entering the house while simultaneously laughing and locking the door behind them. They jeered at and ridiculed me from the cool shade of the house while they proceeded to watch the beloved cartoons. Nope, it was obvious now that it was just about being mean to me, and I was mad. I asked the mother, who was chatting in the kitchen with a neighbor friend, to let me in too, and to unlock the door. The mother, even in front of the neighbor lady, said, "No, you just stay outside," like I was a dog or something. The neighbor lady looked a bit confused, but did nothing to rescue me. So they're all in on it, I thought to myself. My anger at the injustice and abuse began to boil, anger that I had never felt before. I wasn't giving up this time. I was in the right. "Let me in," I demanded with righteous indignation. "Sharon, go away and be quiet," was the mother's only response, and the neighbor lady now pretended that she was out of this conversation. I did not go away. I stood there, and I screamed even louder and with more determination. "No, I won't. Let me in." And I planned on continuing to scream until I wore her down. Each up modulation of my voice matched the up modulation of my anger and intent. But she had a plan too. "If you don't be quiet, go away right this minute, I'm gonna paddle you again." Oh my God, the dreaded paddle. Again? Punished for not liking being punished for no reason. The unfairness, the injustice. I'm a nice little girl. Why would anyone be so mean? Well, I'm not going to be nice any longer, that's for sure. It was the first time in my life I consciously decided against being kind and loving. I screamed with all my might. "No, you won't. You will let me in right now." And I meant it to my very core of my soul. I had never felt true anger before, and this was a very powerful emotion that I was experiencing for the first time in my life. I could feel the power of it growing inside of me. The idea that it was my fate to suffer abuse at the hands of this woman for no reason was more than my pure little soul could handle. All of my bioenergy, all of my new emotions, anger and hatred, seemed to converge into one uncontrollable shadow being that was now growing and welling up deep within me. I've never been so wholly and absolutely angry in my entire life. It was turning into pure rage and fury. It was the first and last time I've ever allowed myself to become that angry. Every cell in my body was mad as hell as this powerful new emotion or whatever surged through me, pulsing larger and larger. Even as I was feeling it grow and expand inside of me like an energy volcano, in that moment, I was also acutely aware that I was feeling something very different than I'd ever felt before. Part of me subconsciously knew that this thing this emotional, powerful energy volcano. It had the ability to become very large and possibly uncontrollable. It might overtake me. It might even kill me, crossed my little mind. I actually thought I might cease to exist at that moment. Weird for a 3-year-old. Most people would have backed off at that point and ratcheted it down. But I, being the curious and science-minded sort, continued to allow it to grow, just so I could see what would happen. Consequences be damned. At that moment, I didn't care if I lived or died. I just had to see what would happen, and this wrong needed to be righted, in spite of what might happen to me. So, as a 3-year-old, I made a conscious decision to permit it to continue. It was kind of scary, but fascinating at the same time, learning the power of this whole new raw emotion. Anger, turning to rage, turning to fury, turning to what? And just as I began to scream once again while simultaneously deciding to cross that threshold of emotional no return, something snapped inside of me. I felt a shift in some kind of release. The pressure of the volcano thing from inside my body and psyche seemed to go away, and I sort of depressurized. I was glad the pressure was gone and kind of surprised that it didn't kill me. And then, at the very same moment that everything snapped inside of me, something snapped inside that kitchen too, and my focus and attention to my inner self got diverted to the outer world. With an audible pop, a small ball of blue fire, about the size of a soccer ball, appeared right in the middle of the kitchen, hovering in the air in the very center of the room. Almost before you could say, "What the heck is that?" the ball quickly expanded, and the blue fire filled the airspace inside the kitchen. It flickered and loudly cracked with fury, drowning out the sound of the cartoons in the living room. It sounded sort of electrical, but mostly like that of a roaring fire, though I felt no heat. I'm not sure what the ladies inside felt, though, but it definitely looked and acted like fire and flames, only blue and kitchen-sized. It was as if the air in that room had decided to become blue fire. That's the only way I can describe it. The two ladies were screaming and batting their heads and each other, afraid that their hair was catching on fire, but it wasn't for some reason. Their screaming and the cackling of the blue flame continued for almost 20 seconds, which is a long time when you sit down and count it out. I stood there, still in absolute rage at first. Even at the first appearance of the blue flame ball, I was still angry as it was expanding. But even at my age, I knew this wasn't normal, and the surprise and wonder of it all caught me off guard. Curiosity and wonder replaced my anger as I watched the ladies screaming, and I saw the frightened little girls in the living room behind them. Seeing their frightened faces somehow made me feel a little bit better about my situation. And that's about when the blue flame lessened and dissolved back into a soccer ball size before fading out altogether. We were all pretty stunned, and honestly, at that point, I was glad I was outside. Well, of course, the ladies called the fire department right away as I stood outside and watched all the commotion through the screen door. They inspected all of the electrical circuits of the house, all of the outlets in the kitchen, and found that nothing would have caused such a thing. The woman kept trying to convince them of what they saw. The fire chief pointed out that there was hardly any evidence of a room engulfing blue fire having occurred there. But one thing was burned, and so they couldn't fully deny that it had happened. If you could venture one guess as to what that one thing was, yeah, it was that dreaded paddle, sitting on the far counter, away from any electrical outlets. I watched with an odd sort of satisfaction, as the woman held it up to the fireman to prove she wasn't crazy. It was only at that point that I began to wonder if that fire had anything to do with me and that anger thing I'd felt. If not, it surely was some divine synchronicity that this bizarre phenomena happened right as I was feeling all of that rage and only burned that paddle. That evening when my parents came to get me, my mother came inside and spent a few minutes to share some very strong words with that evil woman. I didn't understand all of them, I just got the emotional gist of them, and I knew that I would never be coming back to this house ever again. My mother told me to get your stuff, we're leaving. Empowered now, knowing this was my last chance, I listened to my instincts and went directly back to that closet, the one in the mother's bedroom. I opened it, and sure enough, I saw all of my toys were in there, a huge pile on a shelf. She had to have known they were in there. She knew they were mine. What an evil person. I filled my arms with as many of my favorites as I could carry, while my parents angrily honked the horn for me to hurry up. I rescued most of them, and we left, never to return. Nothing like that has ever happened again, although I wonder what might have been had I explored that talent a little more. Back when I was pure and strong and open, was it all me? Was it my guardian angels backing me up? I don't know. I'm not sure that I ever will. It was both scary and satisfying. I don't think I'd have the courage to explore it nowadays, but it's sure come in handy sometimes, I think. I still smile about it to this day and now know with certainty that we are all much stronger and more powerful than the powers that be would have us realize. Our consciousness has been purposely suppressed since our inception. Hopefully, we'll all wake up soon and take back our humanity. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. Thanks for joining me, whether it's your first time or you're a regular. Your support means the world over here. We've got brand new episodes every Friday night. Keep those eyes open for those deep sleep videos. And of course, double features. Subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll never miss a thing. Big thanks to those who shared their stories, and a huge shout out to all of our patrons whom we appreciate so very much. Tracy S, Tamara K, Monica L, ZoeWatt, Chelle B, Donald C, The Dark Cosmos, Marion T, Rat Girl, Alisha S, Erin G, Nikki H, Mr. Revenant, Naz K, Brendon G, Paul T, Nicholas C, Lissane, Arlene F, and Adrienne. If you want to support the Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining our Patreon, patreon.com/thedarkesthour, or click the link in the description to learn more. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour, YT. Stay spooky.